The Grand Hall of the Imperial Council was built for one purpose: to remind everyone who entered it that the Empire had already won history. Crystal pillars rose like frozen lightning. Conquered banners hung beneath a ceiling lit by captive starlight. 12 council members sat around a vast table of polished glass and gold, wrapped in ceremonial robes that glowed with the colors of old campaigns. Every surface in the chamber radiated age, wealth, and power. That was why the laughter felt so dangerous. Councillor Reed stood alone in the center of the chamber in a plain gray uniform, his report floating above the table while the council laughed at him as if he had brought entertainment instead of warning. Admiral Marcus leaned back in his chair, wiping moisture from the corner of one eye. "And you want us to be careful of these humans?" A few councillors laughed harder. Reed kept his voice steady. "My lords, our scouts confirm that humanity reached faster than light travel only 3 centuries after discovering electricity. No species in our archives has advanced that quickly." High Counselor Bennett raised a jeweled hand, calming the room. "Speed is not the same as significance, Counselor. This empire has stood for 10,000 years. We have conquered or absorbed more than 500 species. Why should one young race concern us?" Reed touched the controls and a hologram of Earth appeared above the table, followed by its 3 colony worlds. "Because of pattern, not size," Reed said. "They still wage war among themselves, yet they cooperate to expand. They continue building weapons even in times of peace. Their history, their myths, even their entertainment repeat the same themes: resistance, sacrifice, defiance, survival. They behave like a species preparing for a larger war." Marcus rose, tall and broad, his metals catching the chamber light. "Humans control 4 worlds. We command 10,000 systems. Their biggest ships are barely the size of our scouts. They are divided, emotional, and young. If they build weapons, it is because primitives always confuse violence with strength." Reed forced himself to answer. "Or because they expect someone stronger to come for them." Marcus turned toward him, smiling without warmth. "Then perhaps we should reward their caution." The room quieted. He faced Bennett. "Grant me permission to launch a preventive strike. 3 destroyers will be enough. We make an example of 1 colony world, perhaps more if needed, and they will submit before they become inconvenient." Reed took a step forward before protocol could stop him. "My lord, at least send a diplomatic message first. A warning. Terms. Anything. If they are as adaptive as the reports suggest, a reckless strike could create exactly the enemy we fear." Marcus looked at him as if he had said something childish. "A quick demonstration of force has ended 100 future rebellions. Why waste time speaking to a species that has not yet learned its place?" Murmurs of approval moved around the table. Reed saw the truth in that moment. The council was not choosing this because humans were dangerous. They were choosing it because humans looked small enough to destroy without cost. Bennett folded his hands. "Permission granted." Reed felt the air leave his chest. The High Counselor's voice remained calm, almost bored. "Take your destroyers, Admiral. Show these humans the meaning of imperial reality. Destroy 1 colony world. If they still do not understand, escalate. They will come to the negotiating table soon enough." Marcus bowed. "It will be done." He turned and strode from the chamber, already issuing orders into his communicator. One by one the council members rose, some smiling, some still amused, as if millions of lives had not just been placed beneath a signature. Soon only Reed remained beneath the crystal ceiling, staring at the slowly turning image of Earth and its colonies. 4 worlds. 3 destroyers. 1 fatal decision. He stood in the silence of the empty chamber and felt dread settle into his bones, because the Empire had just made the kind of mistake that powerful civilizations make only once. And somewhere beyond imperial space, 3 destroyers were already turning toward human skies. Without knowing the price yet, Admiral Marcus's 3 destroyers dropped out of hyperspace above New Eden without warning. The human colony turned beneath them in peaceful light, blue oceans and white cloud bands wrapped around a world that had not yet understood it was being judged. Small orbital platforms circled above the atmosphere. Cargo lanes glittered between stations. Surface domes shone under the local sun like beads across the land. From the bridge of his flagship, Marcus studied the planet. Weak defenses. Limited fleet presence. Civilian-heavy infrastructure. Exactly what Reed had warned him about, and exactly why Marcus felt no concern. No formal response from the colony command, my lord, the communications officer said. They are requesting identification. Marcus clasped his hands behind his back and walked toward the main viewport. Of course they are. He stopped before the glass, looking down at the world below. Send them nothing, he said. Open fire. The order passed across the bridge in calm voices. Weapons crews locked targets. Energy levels rose through the destroyer's spine. For a heartbeat everything seemed still. Then the first barrage struck. The human orbital defenses vanished in white flashes. One platform exploded so violently its remains scattered across nearby traffic lanes. Another spun apart in burning fragments before it could bring its guns online. A communications relay ruptured, spilling molten debris into space. On the tactical display, the colony's defensive grid collapsed almost immediately. Minimal resistance, the weapons officer reported. Marcus barely listened. He was watching the surface now. The second wave hit the city domes. Across New Eden, transparent structures cracked under imperial fire. One dome shattered completely, and the atmosphere inside it screamed outward in a flood of vapor, dust, wreckage, and human bodies too small to recognize from orbit. Emergency lights flashed red across the remaining settlements. Surface vehicles scattered in desperate patterns. Civilian channels burst alive with panic, prayers, instructions, and overlapping screams. Marcus muted the broadcasts. Fear always sounded the same. Target power centers, he said. Then transit hubs. Leave enough standing that the survivors understand this was restraint. The destroyers obeyed. Imperial beams punched through the upper atmosphere and carved into the colony's infrastructure with merciless precision. Energy grids failed. Transportation lines erupted. A launch facility disappeared beneath a pillar of fire. One orbital station tried to break away from the planet and flee, but a single shot from Marcus's batteries split it in half. Below, New Eden burned. People were trying to drag children toward shelters that would not hold. Medical crews were sending requests for aid that no one would answer. Marcus turned away. Prepare jump coordinates for the next colony. His tactical officer hesitated. My lord, this world is already crippled. Shall we wait for surrender terms? Marcus looked at him with open contempt. The council requested a lesson. A lesson taught once becomes doubt. A lesson taught 3 times becomes memory. Within minutes, organized resistance on New Eden was gone. Its orbital lanes were clogged with wreckage. Fires spread across the night side like infected wounds. Millions were still alive, and Marcus had chosen that outcome deliberately. Survivors mattered. Terror traveled farther when there were voices left to describe it. Aurora Colony fell next. Its shields rose before the Imperial ships completed attack formation, but they were little more than a gesture. Marcus's destroyers ripped through the orbital ring, disabled planetary cannons, and hammered the colony's major population zones with the same cold efficiency used above New Eden. A medical complex vanished. A transit nexus ruptured. 2 atmospheric processors exploded, turning entire districts into death traps. During the assault, Aurora's governor opened a desperate channel and tried to negotiate. Marcus let the transmission play until screaming drowned out the words. Then he cut it. The third colony, New Terra, lasted less than an hour. Imperial scans identified military depots, industrial centers, and refugee shelters receiving traffic from the first 2 worlds. Marcus destroyed all of them. 6 hours after the first shots above New Eden, 3 human colonies lay in ruin. Only then did he decide Earth deserved a message. Open a broad-spectrum transmission, he ordered. Marcus straightened his uniform and spoke with certainty. This is Admiral Marcus of the Imperial Fleet. Your colonies have been struck for reckless expansion and unlawful military development near Imperial territory. Submit to Imperial authority immediately or face extinction. Resist, And what you have seen today will be remembered as mercy. The message went out toward Earth. Marcus expected panic, diplomats, surrender. Instead, there was only silence. He stood above the burning remains of New Terra and waited for humanity to break. It did not. Far below the smoke and shattered glass, the survivors were beginning to understand that the Empire had not delivered a warning. It had opened a wound that would not close quietly. One day passed after the destruction of the 3 colonies, and no answer came from Earth. Admiral Marcus found that mildly irritating. 2 days passed, then 5, then a full week. Human channels still carried fragments of traffic, but nothing that resembled surrender. No diplomats appeared on open frequencies. No pleas for mercy came from Earth. No emergency envoys rushed toward Imperial space. Border patrols reported reduced movement in nearby human sectors, some encrypted bursts, some disrupted logistics, and several orbital sites going dark, but there was no visible fleet mobilization and no emotional outcry loud enough to satisfy Imperial expectations. From the Imperial Council's point of view, that silence meant exactly what they wanted it to mean. The shock has settled in, one counselor said as Marcus delivered his report beneath the crystal lights of the chamber. Another smiled over folded hands. Grief. Confusion. The usual sequence. They will submit, said a third. They simply need time to understand what they are facing. Soft laughter moved around the table. Not as loud as the first session, but just as smug. Marcus stood in the center of the chamber with his report floating above the crystal table. My assessment remains unchanged. Human communications have sharply reduced. Their colonies are in ruin. Their worlds show no coordinated military response. They now understand the cost of resisting the Empire. High Counselor Bennett nodded with visible satisfaction. Then order has been preserved with minimal effort. Maintain patrols near the border. If they kneel, we accept their submission. If they do not, we finish the matter. At the edge of the chamber, Counselor Reed tightened his grip on the terminal in his hand. He had not been invited to speak. He did anyway. My lord, the silence should concern us. A few counselors glanced toward him in annoyance. Bennett did not look angry. He looked tired, as if Reed had become a habit that refused to die. Concern us how? Bennett asked. Reed activated his terminal. A single intercepted transmission appeared above the table, translated into Imperial text. Remember. Prepare. Unite. Survive. Revenge. The room went still for a moment. Then one counselor gave a short dismissive laugh. Marcus looked at the words, unimpressed. A wounded species talking to itself. Reed held his ground. That message was sent from Earth to every surviving colony before their remaining channels went dark. It was not public grief. It was coordinated. Deliberate. Bennett's face stayed calm. Do not confuse primitive emotion with strategy, counselor. The message vanished from the air, but Reed could still see it. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was disciplined. No begging. No outrage. No appeals to mercy. Just instructions. Remember. Prepare. Unite. Survive. Revenge. Those were not the words of a civilization collapsing. They were the words of a civilization compressing itself. Months passed. Then years. To Imperial observers, humanity seemed to shrink. Surface factories powered down. Orbital activity declined. Several known military yards went silent. Trade volume dropped. Long-range scans of Earth and its colonies suggested retreat, resource stress, and controlled isolation. The Empire saw what it wanted to see, a wounded species curling inward, nursing its losses, learning fear. Reed saw something else. He buried himself in scout logs, freight traces, industrial reports, and border surveillance archives. Small irregularities kept surfacing. Rare metals disappearing from commercial routes. Heavy machinery rerouted under civilian codes. Research specialists moving off public registries. Surface energy signatures falling while unexplained thermal patterns deep below human worlds increased. On paper, each inconsistency was minor. Together, they formed a pattern that Reed could not ignore. Humanity was not becoming quieter. It was becoming harder to see. He filed warnings. They were ignored. He requested expanded reconnaissance. It was denied. He argued that the disappearance of visible industry did not prove weakness. It might prove concealment. The official reply called his conclusion speculative. Then 5 full years passed. And deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, Commander James Stone stood before an observation wall and watched the truth the Empire had failed to imagine. Automated forges stretched for miles through the bedrock. Robotic arms moved in perfect rhythm around hull sections large enough to dwarf anything humanity had built before the attack. White furnace light flowed through the underground vastness in pulsing bands. There was no chaos in the facility, no wasted movement, no fear. Only relentless purpose. 5 years earlier, Stone had watched reports from New Eden while his wife died under a collapsing dome and his daughter hid in failing shelter corridors. Now he watched steel, code, and vengeance taking shape in silence. A young officer stepped to his side. "Production update, sir. Fleet Group Alpha is ahead of schedule again." Stone did not look away from the growing warships below. Good, he thought, because the Empire still believed silence meant weakness. And soon, that belief was going to cost it everything. Across Mars, the Belt, and buried Earth, hidden yards were waking too, feeding the same answer into darkness. Humanity had not gone silent in defeat. Humanity had gone silent to prepare for war. Facility Zero had no windows to the surface. It did not need them. Everything worth seeing was underground. Commander James Stone stood on the observation platform and watched the hidden heart of humanity beat beneath the moon. Automated forges stretched through the bedrock, glowing white and gold. Robotic arms moved around half-finished hulls so vast they made pre-war battleships look small. Conveyor systems carried reactor cores, armor lattices, and weapon housings through assembly lines that never stopped moving. For 5 years, humanity had hidden its grief. Here, it had turned that grief into industry. "Status report," Stone said. Lieutenant Ward scanned production figures. "Output is at 300% of projected capacity, sir. The new nanoforges continue to exceed estimates. Fleet Group Alpha will be ready 2 months ahead of schedule." Stone nodded. 5 years ago, humanity had been divided by flags, politics, and rivalries. Then New Eden burned. Aurora cracked open. New Terra died. In the aftermath, every government, corporation, research lab, and military command had been forced into the same truth: humanity would not survive separately. The Empire had done what centuries of diplomacy never could. It had united humanity. To Imperial observers, Earth still appears to be in controlled decline, Ward said. Surface industry remains minimal. Decoy traffic is holding. Stone approached the tactical ring. "And below the surface?" Ward activated the display. "Below the surface, sir, we are building the largest war machine this species has ever created." Earth appeared first. Then the real overlays came alive beneath it. Underground manufacturing grids, buried transit networks, shielded bunkers, hidden power reservoirs, armored population zones, agricultural caverns, and sealed hospitals. Mars lit next. Then the Belt. Then scattered points across the outer system, each one a concealed yard, depot, or fleet anchor the Empire had never found. "Show me the weapons test," Stone said. The projection shifted to the asteroid belt. A reinforced target drifted in empty space, built to match the mass of an Imperial destroyer. Near it floated a small human test vessel. Then it fired. The beam bent the space around itself as it moved. There was no explosion when it struck. The target simply disappeared, ripped out of reality so completely that the emptiness it left behind looked wrong. Ward spoke into the silence. "Phase shift cannon confirmed, sir. Imperial shields will have no meaningful resistance. Their systems are built to stop force, heat, and radiation, not dimensional separation." Stone kept his eyes on the void. They never imagined anyone would change the rules. Another display came alive, revealing dark ships suspended inside an unfinished dock. Their hulls were smooth and predatory, designed to swallow light. "Stealth systems are complete," Ward said. "Light-bending fields, sensor masking, thermal suppression, signal ghosting. In some conditions, Imperial scans will see false positions. In others, they will see nothing at all. And the border patrols? Stone asked. Active, Ward replied. Still blind. She layered Imperial scout routes over the system map. The scouts continued reporting exactly what human intelligence wanted them to report: abandoned infrastructure, weakened economies, reduced traffic, and the quiet of a species too broken to matter. A chime sounded at Ward Station. Message from Earth Command. Priority clearance. Stone took the tablet. The header read, Project Phoenix. Complete. He read in silence. Civilian populations successfully relocated. Underground cities active. Surface structures converted into automated decoys. Medical continuity secured. Agricultural reserve zones stable. Orbital loss contingencies in place. Total transfer count exceeded 10 billion. 10 billion people moved below the surface in 5 years. Not just to survive bombardment. To free humanity for total war. The Empire thought we were quiet because we were afraid, Ward said. Stone lowered the tablet. That assumption is going to bury them. There is one more message, sir. Personal priority. He knew the sender before the file opened. His daughter stared back at him in flight uniform, older now, harder around the eyes. She had been 12 on New Eden. She had lost her mother under a shattered dome. Pilot certification complete. First in class. Assigned to First Wave Assault Wing. Stone stood still after reading it. Pride rose in him. So did fear. But both had long ago been chained to something darker. The Mars yards? He asked. Full capacity. Strike Fleet Beta can deploy on your order. Stone moved to the main strategic display, where hundreds of markers hovered over the solar system. Every point represented 5 years of silence misread as weakness by an empire that had stopped looking the moment humanity stopped screaming. They think silence means submission, Stone said. No one answered. They still do not understand us. They look at our old wars and see chaos. They look at our history and see division. They never understood that every conflict taught us something. Every battle forced us to adapt. Every terrible lesson hardened us for the day we faced something larger than ourselves. He turned toward the officers at their stations. We were not only fighting each other, he said. We were practicing. Stone straightened. Send the coded signal to all fleet groups. Operation Phoenix begins in 72 hours. Across Earth, Mars, the Belt, and stations buried in darkness, dormant fleets woke. Stealth ships slid from anchor. Weapons chambers sealed. Pilots were summoned. Attack routes unlocked. Final target packets began moving through secure channels. Humanity had been quiet long enough. Now its silence was beginning to move. The Imperial Patrol ship Glory of Dawn never understood that it had already died. It was running a routine sweep, its sensors searching for smugglers, debris fields, and frightened ships that strayed too close to Imperial space. Nothing on its screen suggested danger. The stars were still. The void looked empty. Then the ship vanished from the tactical grid. There was no warning and no time for panic. One moment it was intact. The next, an unseen force split it apart, sending burning fragments drifting through the dark. Officers on nearby relay stations barely had time to register the loss before their channels filled with alarms. On the bridge of the stealth destroyer Nemesis, Captain Thomas watched the wreckage scatter across the stars. His ship remained invisible, a ghost in the void. Around him, his crew worked in complete silence, every movement precise, every eye fixed on the tactical display. First blood, Thomas said. He looked at the projection above the command pit. Begin Phase 1. Across 15 critical Imperial systems, hidden human strike ships moved at once. Some had waited inside debris shadows for months. Others had remained motionless beyond sensor range, gathering intelligence, mapping patrol paths, identifying weak points, and studying the habits of an empire that had stopped believing it could be surprised. Above Centauri Prime, Admiral Robert Black saw 30 human vessels appear from nowhere in the middle of the Imperial shipyards. For one stunned second, the construction docks remained exactly as they had been. Towering frameworks, unfinished warship hulls, defense towers, cargo gantries. Then alarms exploded across the system. Imperial batteries swung toward targets they could barely track. Black did not hesitate. "All ships, weapons free," he ordered. "Remember New Eden." The phase shift cannons fired. Imperial shields offered no resistance. The beams touched the great construction docks, and the structures simply ceased to exist. There was no roaring explosion, no collapse. Matter unraveled and disappeared, scattered beyond the rules Imperial physics could explain. Assembly cradles vanished. Half-built capital ships broke apart before their reactors had ever come online. In less than a minute, the Empire's ability to build warships in that sector was crippled. On Nexus 2, Commander Wilson's strike group hit the military command centers. Imperial detection systems failed first. Tracking grids returned false positions. Automated guns fired into empty space. Reinforcements rushed in, 3 destroyer groups arriving in hard formation with their weapons already charged. "Enemy destroyers closing," Wilson's tactical officer reported. Wilson did not blink. "Show them what humanity learned." The human ships moved with impossible precision. They curved through the battle space like they were following rules only they could see. Imperial targeting computers could not keep up. By the time the gunners adjusted, the phase shift cannons fired again. The destroyers did not explode. They came apart. Armor, hull, support frame, reactor casing, everything that held them together lost coherence at once. One by one, the warships unraveled into drifting wreckage while Wilson's formation slipped past them untouched. In the Riel system, Captain Mary Parker led her squadron toward the Empire's largest fuel refineries. 5 years earlier she had been a schoolteacher. Now she commanded weapons that could tear apart reality. "All targets marked," her executive officer said. "Permission to fire?" Parker looked at the refinery towers and thought of her students on New Eden, of names that had become memorial lists. "Permission granted," she said. "Burn it all." The strike hit with brutal speed. Processing arrays folded inward. Storage platforms ruptured. Transfer hubs vanished. In less than 5 minutes, the Empire lost 40% of its fuel production. Deep beneath Earth, Commander Stone stood over the main tactical display while report after report flooded in. Success at Centauri Prime. Success at Nexus 2. Success at Riel. Success in the relay sectors. Success in the command hubs. The Empire's military structure was being peeled apart with surgical precision. Lieutenant Ward looked up from her station. "Imperial communications are in chaos, sir. They still can't track our ships properly. They're firing blindly." Stone studied the darkening map of Imperial infrastructure. 5 years of silence were now speaking in one language: destruction. "Send the next signal," he said. "Begin Phase 2. Across Imperial territory, more bases went dark. Communication hubs fell silent. Shipyards burned. Reserve depots disappeared. In bunker after bunker, Imperial officers stared at screens that no longer obeyed the logic of war they understood. In his command center, Admiral Marcus received the reports in growing disbelief. His reserves were failing. His backup plans were collapsing. His fleets were being destroyed by an enemy he could not see, track, or counter. Then a junior officer rushed to his console, pale with fear. "My lord," the officer said, "we're detecting massive hyperspace disturbances at the edge of the defense perimeter." Marcus turned sharply. "How massive?" The officer swallowed before answering. "Sir, these attacks were only the advance force." For the first time since he had ordered fire on New Eden, Marcus felt certainty leave him. Humanity had not answered with panic. It had answered with preparation. And now the main fleet was coming. The countdown appeared on every Imperial screen. It spread through command bunkers, fleet bridges, orbital stations, and civilian towers. No one could shut it off. No one could trace it. Beneath the falling numbers, the same message repeated in plain Imperial text. "You brought this upon yourselves. No terms. No surrender. No mercy." In the emergency bunker beneath the Capitol, High Counselor Bennett stared at the display while tactical feeds drowned in red warnings. 15 systems had already been hit. Shipyards were gone. Fuel production was collapsing. Communications were failing. The Empire's military, built over 10,000 years, was being dismantled faster than its commanders could name the damage. Counselor Reed stood near the rear wall, holding his data pad in silence. "We gave them 5 years," he said. Above the capital, defense stations fired blindly into empty space while hidden human ships sliced through them. Across Imperial worlds, panic outtrend facts. Evacuation centers filled. Civilian channels jammed. The species once mocked as primitive was crushing the Empire with impossible calm. Then the countdown reached 0. Across Imperial space, hyperspace split open. Human warships emerged above core worlds, dockyards, and the capital itself until the sky turned black with them. Hundreds appeared first. Then thousands. Their hulls were darker than Imperial metal, their shapes heavier and more purposeful than anything the Empire had ever built. On the bridge of Earth's vengeance, Admiral Lisa West watched the fleet take its final positions. Her flagship alone was 15 kilometers long, but even it was only one dark spearhead in a formation so vast that the tactical display had to widen to contain it. "All fleet groups report ready," her executive officer said. "Imperial home defense is forming a defensive wall." West nodded. "Open a channel. Let them see what their arrogance created." The human fleet activated its external lights at the same moment. In the darkness, the ships blazed like cold stars. Imperial sensors got a clear view of what humanity had built in silence. Strange patterns shifted across human hulls as if reality itself had trouble settling on their shape. Even the smallest frigate carried more firepower than an Imperial cruiser. West's voice rolled across every open channel. "You cannot win this fight. Your shields cannot stop our weapons. Your sensors cannot track our ships. Your tactics are 5 years out of date." On the Imperial flagship, Admiral Marcus listened in disbelief while his officers failed to produce a countermeasure. Energy readings from the human fleet were beyond anything in Imperial war models. "My lord," a sensor officer said, "the human ships are deploying smaller craft." The sides of the human warships opened and fighters poured out by the thousands. They moved in perfect formation, their pilots linked through neural interfaces, their acceleration so violent that Imperial computers kept rejecting it as error. West watched the first 100 break away. "Begin the demonstration," she said. Imperial point defense opened fire. It hit nothing. The fighters phased in and out of normal space while Imperial weapons passed harmlessly through their ghost images. When they reached the defensive wall, their phase-shift weapons fired once. 10 Imperial destroyers vanished. Panic spread instantly. Orders overlapped. Tracking systems failed. Defensive lines bent and broke as commanders tried to respond to an enemy that no longer seemed bound by distance, timing, or matter. "Second wave," West ordered. This time 1,000 fighters moved. Behind them, the main fleet began powering its primary weapons. Space around the formation twisted as if the void itself were bracing for impact. Inside the emergency bunker, Bennett stared at the feeds in growing despair. "How did they advance this far in 5 years?" he whispered. One tactical officer answered without looking up. "Automated construction, hidden production, total mobilization. They converted their civilization into a war machine while we watched the surface and saw nothing." West's voice returned to every channel. 5 years ago, you showed us what happens to the weak. Now we will show you what humanity does when it stops holding back." The Imperial line broke under the opening assault. Warships vanished. Defense platforms ceased to exist. Command relays died mid-transmission. Marcus watched his third defense line collapse and slammed his fist against the console. "Deploy civilian traffic," he shouted. "Put them between our forces and theirs. Even these humans will not fire through innocence." The order spread in desperation. Liners, freighters, private craft, and cargo barges were forced into the battle zone until millions of Imperial citizens stood between the fleet and its enemy. On Earth's vengeance, the reports reached West. "So they hide behind their own people," she said. "All ships, activate gravity tractor beams. Show them how much humanity has learned about precision." The movement of the human fleet changed instantly. Massive warships began weaving through space in timed sequences, phase-shift fire opening corridors between civilian hulls without touching them. Invisible tractor fields reached out, locking onto passenger vessels and pulling them gently away from the combat zone one by one. The human shield collapsed in minutes. Then every Imperial screen lit with a new message. We remember the innocence of New Eden. We will not become like you. The real attack began. Human ships phased through the gaps in the shattered formation and appeared inside the Empire's defensive lines. Their weapons fired with surgical discipline, destroying military targets while leaving civilian structures untouched. Defense stations vanished. Command centers collapsed. Weapons grids went dark. The Empire's last great fleet was being cut apart by the species it had dismissed as primitive. West watched the tactical map turn red with collapsing Imperial assets. Command centers only, she told her fleet. Show them the difference between revenge and justice. Admiral Marcus stood in his command center and watched the Empire die. Across the tactical display, ship after ship vanished under human fire. Imperial formations broke apart. Command relays failed. Defense stations went dark. What had once been the proud military shield of a 10,000-year empire now looked like a collapsing wall of confusion and obsolete doctrine. My lord, his executive officer said quietly, their fleet has achieved total tactical superiority. Marcus gripped the console until his joints paled. 5 years earlier he had looked down on human colonies and ordered fire as if crushing them were an administrative task. Now he was staring at the answer to that decision, and it had arrived in numbers, weapons, discipline, and certainty. We still have the inner command layer, he said. Not for long, my lord. An alert spread across the display. Additional human capital ships were arriving, larger than anything on the field. The final reserve estimates vanished. Even the computers had stopped pretending the battle was recoverable. Marcus understood what the Council had refused to understand. Humanity had not merely survived Imperial cruelty. It had transformed because of it. In orbit above the capital, the Empire's last defensive line fired everything it had left. Missile clouds spread. Heavy lances burned toward the human formation. The human fleet did not break. Some ships phased out of normal space, letting Imperial fire pass harmlessly through them. Others shifted with impossible precision. Then the answer came. Human batteries fired in coordinated sequences, cutting through military hulls, command towers, weapons nests, and orbital artillery with such exact timing that Imperial officers could only watch their defenses disappear sector by sector. No civilian target was touched. Across Imperial worlds, another message spread over public channels. Your military started this war. Your military will end it. Stay clear of military targets and no civilian will be harmed. The effect was immediate. Citizens abandoned military installations. Evacuation routes flooded away from weapons districts and command sectors. For the first time in Imperial history, millions trusted the mercy of an enemy more than the protection of their own rulers. On the bridge of Earth's vengeance, Admiral West watched the tactical picture simplify. They're choosing, her executive officer said. West nodded. Because they finally see the difference. One by one, the Empire's surviving command nodes fell silent. Defense grids disappeared. Orbital strongholds went dark. The last coordinated resistance ended not with glory, but with systems failing faster than courage could replace them. Then came the order no one in the Imperial Palace had imagined hearing. Stand down, Bennett said. The throne room fell silent as Admiral Lisa West walked through its massive doors. Smoke lingered beneath the arches. Emergency power cast cold light over gold walls and cracked stone. The same empire that had once laughed at humanity now waited in stained robes and silence. High Counselor Bennett knelt at the center of the hall with the surviving leadership around him. Marcus stood among them, stripped of command by defeat. Counselor Reed stood nearby, grave, holding no triumph in his face. Human officers entered behind West and stopped in a measured line. Bennett raised his head. We expect execution. West stopped before him. That is what you would do. Bennett said nothing. She held his gaze. That is exactly why we will not. The word struck harder than bombardment. West motioned to an officer. The palace screens came alive, not with battle footage, but with images from space. Human ships were distributing food, medicine, and emergency supplies. Medical teams were treating injured civilians. Engineering crews were restoring power and stabilizing damaged infrastructure. In orbit, human warships had shifted from attack patterns into defensive positions around vulnerable worlds. 5 years ago, West said, your empire taught us a lesson. You thought it was a lesson about power. It was actually a lesson about unity, innovation, and what happens when humanity is given a reason to become more dangerous than fear. Bennett swallowed. Then what are your terms? Another officer activated a holographic charter. The empire as it existed is over, West said. It will not be destroyed. It will be reformed. No single species will hold absolute power again. A new galactic council will be created with equal representation. Imperial military forces will be disarmed. Free elections will be held on all controlled worlds. Human technology will be shared for peaceful development, recovery, science, and joint defense. The chamber remained still. Marcus finally spoke, his voice rough with disbelief. You could destroy us. West looked at him without pity. Power is not proven by destruction. Real power is knowing when not to use it. The palace screens changed again. New Eden appeared, scarred but alive. Joint human and imperial crews were beginning reconstruction. Memorial foundations marked the places where domes had failed and millions had died. We will build a memorial there, West said, for the humans your empire murdered. Not to preserve vengeance. To preserve memory. Counselor Reed lowered his eyes. Outside the palace, the capital was changing. Human transports moved through the streets with aid. Citizens emerged from shelters. Across the empire, ships that had arrived as instruments of vengeance were taking up positions as guardians of transition. West turned toward the doors, then paused. This is humanity's real victory. Not that we defeated you. That we chose to help your people rise from what you made of them. She walked out, and her officers followed. And no one tried to stop her. Behind her, the empire remained in the ruins of its certainty while above the capital the human fleet held its watch, no longer as conquerors, but as guardians of a new age in galactic history.